Good evening, everybody. This is Cherri Gregg, and this is Real Talk with Cherri. How's everybody doing? Hope you're having a good week. A lot of stuff has been happening, and a lot of us are just holding on for dear life as we watch national news. And so I want to welcome you all into the live. We have some wonderful guests this evening, and I'm really excited to have them with me. So how's everybody? Please leave comments in the live and share this video and tag a friend right now. If you have friends who are not on Facebook, please note that if you go to my YouTube channel, you can also share that link as well so that they can watch via live stream. This is the second time that we've done that. And so I want to welcome you all to Real Talk with Cherri. It's my personal community give back during this COVID-19 crisis. We go live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 7:30. We're talking about critical issues of importance to our community. And one of the most critical issues is how we worship, right? Born and raised in the church. My father is an elder within the AME Zion Church. And so we have all been hurting, wanting to go back into fellowship, because that's one of the things that COVID-19 has disrupted in some ways. We haven't been able to be with one another, but we've all been worshiping virtually. And recently, there's been a lot of push and pull. Churches and church leaders across the country have been citing First Amendment as to why churches should reopen. And less than a week ago, President Donald Trump came out in support of many of those church leaders, saying that churches are essential and that church leaders should be allowed to open their sanctuaries once more. Well, locally, leadership stepped up, wrote to our president, and rejected that. And I just want to read to you guys a little bit of what was said here. We had Dr. Alyn and Reverend Marshall Mitchell. They both responded to the president in a joint letter. After he declared that churches are essential, they jointly rejected this statement or any other president's declarations regarding the church. We'll go into more depth with their letter in just a moment. And I just want to say hello to everybody. I just wanted to tee this up for you guys. Tag a friend, share this video right now. This is a very important discussion. And I just want to bring in Reverend Dr. Alyn Waller and Reverend Marshall Mitchell, both of you, into Real Talk with Cherri, and just say thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insight with us this evening. How are you both doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Good.
Excellent.
Things are great.
Yeah, I understand you were busy today. I see you, Reverend Mitchell, over there. Marshall's dressed in his scrub, because earlier today, what were you doing, sir?
We were testing at Salem Baptist Church, finally. I had to go to Enon twice, since Enon is our mother church. And finally, we got to Salem. We tested the Quaker State Funeral Association. That is the association of all the Black funeral homes and morticians in the region. As everybody knows, they have been under the gun during this pandemic, burying so many of our loved ones. So we wanted to show a little bit of love to them and test as many of them as possible. So I literally have just come off the battlefield with Dr. Stanford does all the fighting. Mm-hmm. We do all the setup. We do all the parking, all the logistics. And we had a good day. They are spiritual days. And I would say I'm doing great. I'm dressed in, I haven't showered yet, probably a little too much information, but I'm feeling great. And I would just say, with respect to virtual worship, Alyn Waller and Marshall Mitchell have seen each other more in this pandemic than we see each other sometimes in a year.
Right. Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right.
And so let's transition into this, because we have so much to talk about tonight, because the Black church, the church, has been so integral in this fight against COVID-19. And so the big topic I want to start with that I teed up was the joint letter that you two gentlemen wrote in response to President Donald Trump's declaration that churches are essential and that it was time for governors to allow places of worship to open back up. I just want to first ask you, why did you feel compelled to respond publicly to this letter, to this declaration, should I say?
Well, Well, what we were responding to is we were rejecting Donald Trump's using this moment for political pandering and using us as his bait. Um, there's no question that we are essential. There's no question that the church is important. But there's also no question that Donald Trump doesn't really care about that, and that he was using the conversation to politically pander to a part of his constituency that is beginning to wane because of his ineffective leadership across the board. And he is trying to shore up his reelection bid. And he is cross contaminating a number of different arguments. Number one, the separation of church and state, that's its own argument.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, whether we should should gather in groups at this time. Number three, whether he speaks for us or can speak to us. So by his doing that, what we thought we wanted to do is clear the air and reject, number one, his overreach into the sovereign nature of the church in this country, and to also reject the thought that Christians are so caught up in one piece of who we are that the church is closed if we're not worshiping in the sanctuary on Sunday morning. Our churches have not been closed. We've just been worshiping in different ways. So we just reject the assumptions. We reject the presuppositions of everything he had to say.
Yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pastor hit the nail on the head. I mean, one of the things that we tried to do was to assert the Americanness of our own belonging. So what we did is we didn't want to have a theological conversation with him because you know how sideways that will go. What we wanted to have was an American conversation about the Declaration of Independence, about the 10th Amendment, about the Federalist Papers, all of the things that he pretends to worship and to enshrine. And what we wanted to do was delegitimize him in that realm. The sovereignty of the church is already a decided issue for people like Alyn and me. That's a non-starter. So we're certainly not going back to church when this petty prince gives us permission to go back, right? We're going to rely upon science. We're going to rely upon God. We're going to rely upon as shepherds and under shepherds of churches, we're going to rely upon our own instinct about the safety of our people. And so that was very easy. He put the bait and he didn't realize we were putting him on the hook. And I think that's an important way to deal with him in these modern times.
Yeah, and I just want to put here on the screen so people can see a section of this letter. You said, we will return to church at an appointed time of God's making and our choosing. Know that while we have not been at church, we have not for a second stopped worshiping and praising God. And I want to point this out because virtual church service hasn't been able to, because I went to a press conference in New Jersey where some church leaders held a press conference and they said, you know, this is of God. We must meet. It's, you know, we did everything we could. We must meet in church. Now, you hear you say we have not for a second stopped worshiping and praising God. Is virtual enough? Do you think that people should cross that line? And obviously you don't, but your comments on that.
Yeah, I think virtual is enough for now. One of the things that I have found to be very unusual is on Sunday mornings, people would have to make a choice between Salem or Enon. Everybody I talk to now no longer has to make that choice. They're going to Enon, they're going to Salem, and then they might go to Mount Carmel. So for many people who had checked out on the church, all you have to do is look at your numbers and you see the number of people who are attending your church, people who I never imagined to be at my church are showing up. And so in many ways, this might reflect God's return of his people to a church for right now. But what I've also seen is I've seen Enon provide food cupboard services. I've seen Salem do it. I've seen First Baptist Church of Crestmont. And so what I think God is doing is squeezing his fruit to get some juice out that otherwise, if we had not found ourselves in this current predicament, might not have been manifest in the world today.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, if you reduce the church to the Sunday morning worship, you really neuter the faith. A church is more than the gathering on Sunday morning. Now, I'll be the first to say the gathering is the engine that drives, and it is important. And I can't wait to get back. But the church is more than that. And that's what we're trying to emphasize. What we also want to do is what I hoped to do is stop the arguments before they start because of something the president said. If, someone who thinks different than we think, that's fine. Think differently, but let's not fight about it. And let's not turn it into us versus them. And that's what he was attempting to do. And so we reject the further divisive ways in which he is trying to chop this country up. And also, we have a responsibility to model right behavior. This is not a question of whether we have the right to go back, because we do. The real question is, we are one of the strongest organizations in the community, and don't we have a responsibility to model what people should be doing? And if science right now says it's dangerous for 25 or more people to be in the same area for too long indoors, then it just makes sense, not out of edict or an issue of rights and responsibilities, but out of serving others, that we would model the behavior that best serves humanity. That's how you show your love for God, by how you show your love for people.
Yes. And I have to say that some of these churches, and I've been monitoring this issue, and I remember when this issue of closing businesses and churches were included, the first thing I thought from years of practice law, I said, people are going to assert the First Amendment here. They're going to say that the government cannot shut down churches. But I want to, and it seems in some ways it has divided along political lines, and in some cases racial lines as well. And so I posted this question because I want our audience to also think about this issue, and you can post questions and comments as well. Do Black churches specifically have a heightened responsibility during this time to be even more contemplative over whether or not to reopen, given the disparities that we are seeing in Black communities and that you all are on the front lines dealing with every day?
Yeah, the Black church for Black people never has the luxury of playing second fiddle. It is always playing first violin, and it has just got to be it. When it doesn't, it is castigated in a way that no other institution is. People consume what we wear, what we drive, where we are during moments of crisis. And so if we don't show up, that becomes fodder for people who weren't even coming to our church anyway, who then go off to social media to say, that's why I don't go to church, because they do this. And I think that extra burden actually becomes a blessing, because it means that the Black church has the luxury and the prerogative to be the moral conscience of America. I think the interesting thing that Donald Trump is doing, and I think it's the law of unintended consequences, is he is shrinking white evangelicalism in a way that he does not appreciate. And the evangelicals who have benefited from the political bonus that they've received in him, they are destroying the church for their children and grandchildren, who, if you look statistically now, are beginning to check out of the white evangelical church.
Wow. I mean, and that's an interesting perspective, that this debate, throwing church in the middle of politics in this way, could have a negative impact that ripples through generations. And it's like churches are the essential backbone of many, many, many communities. And is there a way to reopen? And I want to kind of shift that, because they are essential in that way. And even though we found a way through virtual worship to keep that connection, is there a path to this as we continue through this COVID-19 process where it would be okay? Are you thinking along those lines at this point?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. There is a way. And I want to push on the conversation just to make sure we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because one thing is a political issue. The other thing is a practical issue. The
Mm-hmm.
political issue, it must be said, the city didn't close my church. I did. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The mayor did not close Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. The pastor did, and the deacons did. It was our choice to say, based on science, they are saying that it is not good to be gathered in crowds. We're not going to have church. That's what's real. So since they didn't close us, they don't get to open us. We will open when it makes sense. And the governor makes sense when he said, let's move it from red to yellow to green.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense. And so I will work on that schedule, because what it means to be American, what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a Pennsylvanian is let's all work together so we get this back. So that's number one. Number two, now we have to think about, what does the science say? How many people can we get in our buildings? Well, 1/3 of the people, some people are doing this stuff. Let's borrow some of their homework. It makes sense to me that if my building holds 5,000, then when it's safe to do so, maybe 1/3 of that number, and we'll have to space them out. Maybe we'll have more services than we normally have for the amount of people that want to come, and always continue to stream. So all of that's being thought through, but we have to first remember who closed the churches. It wasn't the state, it was conscientious pastors. Now, it could be argued, and also the pressure. You will recall there were, and I don't want to speak for anybody, but there were persons who did not want to close, and they were not going to be put in jail had they opened. But the community spoke up and said, we don't want you to do that. And I think that most people are conscientious, most Christians and most pastors that I know love their people enough not to press what is our right, because everything is not about rights. Sometimes it's about responsibility. We got a right to worship, but what we have more than a right to worship is a responsibility to serve. And I think that that's what we're saying more.
Yeah. And I want to throw this to you, Reverend Mitchell, because one of the things we've seen, and I've read articles where you've seen churches in the South reopen too soon, and you've seen, outbreaks of COVID-19. You've actually seen pastors lose their lives because they opened too soon. I mean, just the practicality, the thought of that. As someone who's seen people get tested and doing all this work, I mean, just the idea of that, could you talk about that a bit and why this sovereignty is such an important aspect of the church here?
Well, the sovereignty, while it is constitutional, the idea existed before the amendments, which protected the freedoms of the church, right? That's part of the foundation of America. We didn't want a king to determine who the bishop of an archdiocese was, right? Because then the king could ultimately tell that preacher or that bishop what to say. So that is a well-established American principle, which finds its roots in Western Europe for the 100 or 150 years before the country was founded. So that, for me, that argument was already settled. With respect to some of the people who are adamant about endangering their people, and I don't want to sound too flippant, but I don't think I'm too far off. I think if we got some of those people on this screen right now, we would have a hard time convincing some of them that the world was not flat. And I worry about some of those congregations and some of the people who are in those congregations in a postmodern scientific world where faith and science can exist at the same time. When it looked like this was very dangerous, first thing I did is I got on the phone with Alyn, I got on the phone with Charles Kwan, I got on the phone with Donald Moore and said, what are you guys thinking? Are you going to close? Are you going to open? So it was very collaborative. It was very peer oriented. It was also very personal, where we prayed about the needs of our congregation and sought to hear from God and the Holy Spirit. And so we were very intentional about that. But I think that group that is, and it's almost a type. I think the other side of this is going to be very difficult for that group and that type to evangelize in the world, where people think that science and faith can coexist at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think modernity is going to present a real challenge for them if they want to be an evangelical church and evangelize in the world.
Yeah, because you've heard that a lot, saying church leaders saying, God will protect us only by the blood of Jesus, and we will be saved in church, even though we see what this virus is doing, especially to communities of color. And I think this is a good time to transition to the groundwork that has been done by churches, specifically Black churches in this city, leading the charge nationally. Could you all talk about that? Because Black doctors, Black churches joining hands, getting the job done. Who talked to who? Tell us how this coalition came together.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say it because Marshall will be too modest to say it. Bottom line, Marshall Mitchell really took a leadership role in this and worked with Dr. Ala Stanford. Of course, Ala recognized the need. Now, she is a pediatric surgeon who shouldn't have to do this. I think we need to remember she shouldn't have to be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
The government should have provided testing.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Alyn Stanford pulled the doctors together, and Marshall got out and began to beat the band to help her get into the community. And still, the best way to get into the community is through the Black church.
Mm-hmm.
And so Marshall has been out there every time. I happen to be talking about it because I happen to have the virus. But I've only been out there the time I got tested and the time it was at my church. Marshall has been at every testing site since they began. So he really is the face of this collaboration with the Black church and these Black doctors. I'm grateful for all the pastors who have opened their parking lots because Marshall made it easy. I said, what do you need? Chairs and your parking lot. You don't have to open up your building. People were concerned, are we going to have sick people walking through the building? All you have to do is unlock the parking lot, put a couple of chairs out there, and they did everything else. And so Marshall has worked tirelessly with this. And because of that, over 5,000 people in our community have been tested, which has implications for understanding the nature of health in our community and other collaboratives as we move forward.
Wow. And Marshall, I have to say, I have come to several testing, and you've always been there in those green scrubs. And one of the things that struck me when I interviewed you, you said we have resources. We can do this. And you mentioned how this is like a point of self-determination. Tell me the motivation behind this and why it was so important for Black churches and Black people generally to take their futures in their own hands in this way.
Well, I think there has always been the ideology of self-determination in concert with God in the Black church. When you think about it, the first real estate we owned after we bought farms or inherited some farms in the South was we bought and built Black churches, and we bought and built Black colleges. And that represented a golden era for African Americans. Cherri, you went to Howard, I went to Howard. We went there because we had trust and confidence that Negro hands that shaped Negro minds produced great products. Mm-hmm. And so I can trust. My grandfather pastored Enon from 1916, I think, to 1931.
That's right.
His father was Jewish, his mother was Black. His mother was a slave girl. His father was a Jew who he met twice. The culture I was raised in was never bereft of a sense that if you're Black or Jewish, you should do for yourself because no one else will do for you. And it was abundantly clear to me that I could not trust Donald Trump, I could not trust Governor Wolf, and I could not trust Jim Kenney to do for me what I should do for myself because they can't love me as much as I love myself. They can't love Enon as much as I love Enon or Alan Waller or Mount Airy Church of God in Christ. And so that kind of high motivation for self has really driven this effort. And ALA comes from the same ideological school of thought She's a surgeon. She's got an account at LabCorp. She can test people. We can afford to come up and pay for $100,000 worth of tests for Black people. We can afford, just think about the people who sit in our congregations who have cars that cost $100,000, who have homes that cost $800,000. And if we can do that, if we can live in places like that and drive automobiles like that, and how can we say we believe in God and love our people and not provide the same kind of luxury of equity in the midst of a storm? And when you hear Commissioner Farley say, who's the health commissioner of the city of Philadelphia yesterday, in front of a city council with 11 Black city council people, that they've tested 85,000 people and they've only tested 30,000 Black people when this has been a plague for Black people. Like, how do you, I would be so embarrassed. If I had been Commissioner Farley, I would have grabbed my senior staff and said, y'all better find me 20,000 Black people to test tonight before I go to meet with those 11 Black city council people tomorrow morning. And I also think it's an absolute lie. I do not believe for a second that the city's health department has tested 85,000 people. Number one, because I don't even know where a health department clinic is, and I've lived in this city 49 years. And I know if we knew that 85,000 people were going to the city's health clinics, we would know about it because some of our members would have told us that they've gone there. I don't know a single person who has been to be tested at a city health clinic. And I actually think the administration is playing a game of trickeration, going back to my Cleveland brother. You know who you know who I'm talking about, Alyn. It's a game of trickeration because I think the city is trying to take credit for the numbers of people who've been tested at Jefferson, at Einstein, at Pennsylvania Hospital, at Presbyterian. You don't get a chance to take credit for those people who've been tested at those hospitals. It's a difference between testing those people and ultimately reporting who has been tested.
Yeah.
And I think at some point, someone is going to ask him how many people were tested at the Center City Health Clinic, and then he's going to run into a buzzsaw. So for me, self-determination means I love myself, I love my people, I love those institutions, and I know God loves us.
Yeah, and I have to say, making them accessible, because I went to a couple of the testing sites, talked to people in the lines, and all of them said they couldn't find one in there. You know, some of them didn't, had to catch buses. I had to catch buses or an Uber in the middle of a pandemic when catching buses and an Uber could get you the coronavirus. So it's like, that was the only way you could get tested. And so it was tough. And so the low bar to that helped a lot of people. And so Reverend Waller, I want to go back to that day you got tested. Mm-hmm. And then at your own church, because the Black churches and the Black doctors came together, you got tested and came back positive.
Right. That was absolutely crazy to me. I only got tested because it's kind of it's consistent with what I have done over with other tests. You model the behavior you want people to do. When back in the early part of the change of the century, when we were doing AIDS tests and the rapid test came out, one Sunday morning, I took a rapid AIDS test in the pulpit. Then we put it up on the rostrum and sang hymns for 20 minutes until my results came back. And so that's consistent with what we do. So that's all I was doing, because the testing criteria said you have to have been exposed or have symptoms, of which I thought I had neither. So when I got the call 48 hours later, I really honestly thought you must have the wrong person. And you must have switched something up. I did not believe it, but I ultimately recognized that I think it was God's gift to me so that I could use my platform to talk about it, because it was me, it got a lot of attention. And we could call up the reality is we don't have enough tests. We could call up the reality that comorbidities are impacting our people, and the scarcity of tests is causing greater health problems in the Black community. And so for those who are on a ventilator that could not speak, I was able to speak. And that's what this has been.
Yeah. And I think your case also showed, because you did not have the serious symptoms,
right,
how faulty, and I want you to jump back in here, Reverend Mitchell. I mean, how faulty the process, the general process was for testing communities and high-risk communities specifically, and you guys removed a lot of that in the work with the Black doctors.
Yeah, money. You know, it's interesting in our church, and we believe this, that money is the root, the love of money is the root of all evil. But let me tell you what, money changes things. And when we took the money element off the table, it meant Black people who were not able to get a prescription to get tested at Abington or to get tested at Pennsylvania Hospital. Because if you had a doctor, you could get a prescription, you could go to any of those hospitals and you could get tested, right? That's the dirty little secret in all of this. If you had a doctor, you could get in there, it might take a couple of days, but you could get tested. If you don't have a doctor, if you don't have social access, you couldn't get tested. The beauty and brilliance of what Alyn did was we were able to raise enough private sector philanthropy, church by church, Black organization by Black organization, crumpled $5 bill by $5 bill to take the money issue off the table. When you took the money issue off the table, it created access. It created more equity. So the 5,000 people we've tested, probably 4,900 were Black. Right? Wow. It took money, helps, and resources and access take inequality off the table. And that, for me, that's why the self-help and self-determination element of this is so powerful, because we can actually model that and roll that out in other elements of our lives. I mean, imagine if the National Baptist Convention, the African Methodist Episcopal Church decide, you know what, if we can do church online, maybe we can do our national convention online. When the Kappas came to Philadelphia the last time, they spent, now this is according to Sam Patterson and other people who were in charge of it, they spent upwards of $50 million in Philadelphia on airline tickets, on hotel rooms, on food, on alcohol. It was the very first time, to my knowledge, that the Marriott ran out of alcohol downtown. That represents power, because if you turn that $50 million around, the last time the Trump Hotel and Casino was sold at an auction fire sale, when Donald Trump went bankrupt, I think the third time, it sold for $15 million. And so if we begin to see, and remember, if you've got $50 million cash, you can leverage that and actually borrow maybe another $125 million on it. So imagine what it says to African Americans if we can take money off the table, where we have our own financial means, which creates our own access, we can begin to get at the inequity and the inequality in the system. Because here's what I also know. When cops encounter somebody who they think is African American, who they think that person might have access to a very high-priced lawyer, they speak to them differently.
They do.
And I've also noticed in these police killings, there is also a phenotype, a look that these police officers seem every time to find people who fit a look that they think makes them the lower class Black. Yep. And that means it's open season. And I think Black cops, a lot of Black cops get caught up in that too.
And before we shift to that, because we're going to talk about that very topic, I want to ask one more question on this COVID-19 before we switch over. And I want to talk about the disparities, okay? Because that's why the consortium was created. But I have to say, as a Black woman, I was still a little bit shocked that the disparities were so stark. And today I saw a story on CNN about my hometown, Prince George's County, Maryland, and how, it's one of the richest counties for African Americans in the country, and yet the disparities still exist. I want to get your thoughts on that issue. Like, you talked about we take money off the table. These are people who are well-to-do, that have access to hospitals and doctors, and yet still make up a significant portion of the deaths and the cases of COVID-19. How do we start to shift that, Reverend Waller? And also,
I think we have to, and that's a larger issue that's not just COVID-19. It's about what it means to be Black in America. And the health disparities are there, and they are systemic. There is the overt oppression that we deal with, and the systemic inequities that stack the deck against us. Then there are the behaviors that are born out of an internalized oppression that cause us to act in certain ways that are not in our best interest. And so we have a double fight on our hands. On the one hand, we need to fight the system and challenge the field to get even. And then we need to fight the internalized oppression and the ways in which we are complicit in our own demise. And so it's not either or, it's both and. We've got to remind people about, health. Churches need to think about, the church dinners of a generation ago may not be what needs to happen now if we are going to beat this. We need to talk about, churches need to do things like the know your numbers at Enon and addressing health. Our conversation in the pulpit has to be different, where we celebrate health and not celebrate sickness. And celebrate the God who gives you disciplined lifestyle that includes your eating and your sleeping and your practicing Sabbath that lets you be healthy, as opposed to just the God who's a doctor in the sick room. And so, because he's also a nutritionist in the office. And so we have to have a cultural change, but it's fighting two fights, because if you stay on the behavior too long, it sounds like we're blaming the victim. Yeah. And if we stay on the systemic stuff too long, then we're letting off abhorrent behavior. So we have to fight both if we're going to change something.
Yeah. I think this is the perfect transition to kind of pivot back to what you brought up, Marshall, here. When we talk about being Black in America, I mean, the disparities are part of it. And yeah, there's some internalized oppression we need to deal with, as Reverend Wallace said. But Reverend Mitchell, I mean, we also, just being in these bodies, we've seen death come to Ahmaud Arbery. We've seen death come to Breonna Taylor. We've seen death come to, George Floyd. And that's just what we found out in the past 30 days. Okay. We don't even want to go back. How are we to process this? I mean, and we're in the middle of a pandemic because racism didn't stop.
I'm not certain yet that we can process it without being further traumatized. America's pre-existing condition is racism. Mm-hmm. And that creates all of the systemic issues that Alyn was just pointing to. I would say in your situation in Prince George's County, and Atlanta are storied among African Americans, and African Americans like to talk about Prince George's County. In 2008, when the economy went belly up the last time, Prince George's County had one of the highest mortgage default rates in the country. Mm-hmm. We have so many wealthy African Americans in Prince George's County, but let me throw you another statistic. The two worst educational counties in the state of Maryland, number one is Baltimore, number two is Prince George's County, right? So it has all of this accumulated Negro wealth, which actually oftentimes just simply is turned into Negro consumerism and commercialism. It means we buy homes that are too expensive. And then you take that over the lifetime of that mortgage, and what that begins to do, it robs the children of the opportunity to fly overseas. It robs children of the opportunity to travel abroad. If you wind up with two parents who are government contractors or senior government executives, and they buy a Mercedes Benz, and they happen to buy the 400 class or S class, that begins to cascade, and it robs you of these foundational things that help to build other people up. And so while we think, my dad used to always call it, I can't use the language here, but something when somebody was Negro rich, and I think you all know the word that I probably would use in private, when somebody is Negro rich. And he'd always say, anytime you put Black or Negro on the front of something as an adjective, you've already declined it. You've already lowered it. And I think what we've got to do is we've got to stop thinking in terms in a globally competitive environment, stop thinking of it as the wealthiest Black county in America. Because if you say the wealthiest Black county, that means absolutely nothing to someone who comes here from China or India. And we've got to really start for our children to globalize what we do. Otherwise, we start celebrating what is in the second lane rather than putting our kids in that first lane and making more of our kids globally competitive.
That's right.
That's right. And as we continue to work, but we've seen this, and I had a chance to talk to attorney Benjamin Crump a couple of weeks ago for Real Talk. And one of the things he talked about was the need for all of us to stay activated, right? And that this idea that this justice, that we see what's happening in front of us with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, a lot of these issues that were happening cannot move forward, won't move forward unless we are activated. How do we stay activated? Because we don't get justice unless we demand it.
That's exactly right.
We demand it. Yeah.
I want to suggest, in light of what is happening with Mr. Floyd in Minnesota, everybody is up in arms right now and we're concerned. But I'd like to point to something in Philadelphia right now that I think can be a piece of the issue. You will recall a year ago, 13 police officers were fired for their Facebook postings. Well, right now, some of those officers are in arbitration seeking to get their job back because we're asleep and we're on to the next issue. We have to make sure that Black reporters like you and those of us who have microphones begin to remind this city that those hearings are going on right now. We need the mayor to know, and we need those who sit in seats of importance to know that we will not stand for them to have received a year-long paid vacation only to get their job back. And when we win now, not last year, getting them fired was not the win. Making sure they can't come back the back door is the win. And when police officers around this country who are used to doing wrong things, getting a slap on the wrist, and then coming back in the back door, when they see that the police officers in Philadelphia actually for real got fired, that might send out something that says this is real. I mean, we need them to have, oh shit. And I mean it that way. Absolutely. Now, everybody remember I said that. We need them to say that. That'll be the only thing that they talk about. But that's what has to happen. It has to be that profound if we're going to make a difference.
Yeah. And to your point, Alyn, look, the person who negotiates the collective bargaining agreement with the police is going to be appointed by a mayor. Jim Kenney was delivered by Black people over another Black man in the Democratic primary. And so it is understanding a way to put pressure on the system so that when you win elections, people should be talking to Joe Biden right now, and they should be making up for the failure of Barack Obama to appoint a Black woman who was 39, 42, or 43 years of age when he was president to the Supreme Court. Because if it had not been for Michelle Obama, no Black folks would have had confidence in a biracial guy with a name like Barack. She validated him. And so it is and Barack Obama, who I love, found gay Jewish, gay Hispanic people to appoint to the Supreme Court, but could not find an African-American female federal judge who was 42 or 43, the same way Donald Trump did, the same way George Bush did with Clarence Thomas. Those are the kind of demands you've got to make so that if you are delivering a Joe Biden, you simply look at him and you say, pop, pop, wake up. There will be a Black woman on the Supreme Court. Is that clear? And when you have that kind of moral authority, he will sit there because politics counts money and votes. Right. And if you make that demand right now and say, we're going to give you a binder, to quote Mitt Romney, we're going to give you a binder of Black women from which you can choose.
Binder of love it. Yeah.
We're going to give you 9 Black women who are between the age of 38 and 52 who can spend the next 35 to 40 years on the bench. And remember, Barack Obama had a majority in the Senate for the first 2 years when those seats opened up. And if George W. Bush can appoint Clarence Thomas, then Barack Obama and others have to understand how vital it is. And in politics, all you have is right now. And
I gotta ask you this. And sticking on politics, we've had debates and group chats everywhere over what Black people should be demanding. Should they be demanding African-American woman a vice presidential pick? Or should they say, you know what, we get a woman, we don't care who it is. Instead, we want a Black woman Supreme Court justice. What do you think?
The answer is yes.
Yes, right.
In politics, you have to be greedy. Do you think the Jewish community says, well, you're going to give us a Supreme Court justice or you're going to continue to support Israel?
Be greedy.
No,
yeah.
No, you don't ever start by negotiating against yourself. What you say is, if we sit at home, you will lose. What is it worth to you? And for a politician to hear what is it worth to you changes the dynamic. And they will figure out a way to bring you to the party. And so do I think it should be an African-American female vice president? Sure. Show them Val Demings. She's a former police chief. She served on the impeachment committee. She has won elections. She has arrested people. And she will look at Pence and say, I've arrested people before. It does not frighten me that you walk near me. I have a permit to carry a handgun, and I have locked people up before, and I might lock you up after November.
Right.
Yeah. These are some of the choices. Do you think, and Reverend Waller, do you think Black people got pissed about, the issue, Joe Biden saying, if you ain't Black, if you gotta choose between me and Trump, you ain't Black? Do you think, first of all,
not if you listen to the whole context. I mean, if you listen to the whole context, you'll understand what was being said there. But what I do think is we have a moment, and those of us who have some seats of distinction and those of us who have even higher, we've got to make sure and remind Joe Biden right now, the only reason why he's still living is Black folk. The only reason he survived through this primary is Black people. He owes us, but we got to make sure the people that are closest to him get that word to him. Because, I mean, even though I do not want Donald Trump to win again, we still have to suggest to him that if he doesn't treat us right, we won't treat him right.
Yeah. And I think, but there's a lot of people who actually feel that way. You know what I'm saying? They want to see something, and they always, and Black people feel like this chip, this pawn that keeps getting flipped around and things like that. But it's like, what other choice?
It's a poor strategy to have your opponents know what you're going to ask for in advance, right? Mm-hmm. Because that will become the story, right? It will become the story that Mad Maxine Waters is going to be the Secretary of the Treasury and she's going to ruin the stock market. Or it will be a story that will show Stacey down in Georgia as the Supreme Court justice, and then Republicans and conservatives will begin to do the nod and wink, the dog whistle stuff. You know she's not married, wink, wink. You know what kind of rights she will award to people on the Supreme Court when she gets there, right? And so you don't let everybody know what you're dealing with. I think what you do is people like Jim Clyburn, who literally, if Black people saved Joe Biden, Jim Clyburn threw him the life raft.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
So you can trust somebody like who's a good AME, who goes to church every Sunday, who never became a fixture in Washington. One of the reasons I fundamentally believe we didn't get what we should get in the Obama age is, frankly, and I'm Alyn cursed, so I might as well.
What out there? It's real talk.
There were too many people around Barack Obama who did not have a quote unquote authentic Black experience, who were wedded to the Black church and truly loved Black culture, the historic sense of Black culture that all three of us. He didn't
have blackety Black folk around him.
He didn't have a Vernon Jordan, right? And Bill Clinton had a Vernon Jordan. So Bill Clinton, as a result, had an instinctive sense of Black people because people like Vernon Jordan were around him. And the Obamas they were still a little starstruck. And so if you did not have Ivy League pedigree, you weren't goody, you weren't part of the club, unless you were a low-class Black person like Jay-Z, who never thought about going to college. They're very complex. Like, if you were, Barack Obama was a master of Black cultural surface level stuff. Like, he'd give a speech and say, "Well, I'm going to dust my shoulders off," and Black people go, "Ah!" Right? And he'd sing amazing.
Below, you didn't think that that his Blackness went deep enough.
There are some Black people who would not even have gotten that reference, but if you try to mess with their mother's health care, or if you try to damage their church, they will rise up in righteous indignation. And I think Barack Obama, he got the Al Green stuff. He could sing Amazing Grace. But then for him to have never met with the presidents of Black colleges in the map room with all of his secretaries of agencies and say to them, figure out a way to help Alcorn, figure out a way to help Livingston, figure out a way to help Central State, figure out a way to help Wilberforce, because you don't have to ask Jews to remember Israel. There's something built into the culture that forces us to remember Israel.
So how do we bring it back? You know, we only have a couple more minutes before we wrap up, but I want to know, how do we bring it back to because I don't know, like a lot of people say, do we really have a Black agenda that we're putting down? Do we? And I happen to have gone to Israel and seen up close how the Jewish community works together collectively, and they stand together in a force. You know, how do we do that? How do we bring us together? And is COVID-19 the thing that kind of like woke us up and made us realize, you know what? We got to save ourselves and we need to come together. How do we do that?
Well, I think number one, we have to remember that we're not a monolith. And so there's going to be some diversity within the context of the Black experience. And we have to allow for that diversity. But within the context of allowing for that diversity, we're going to have to, all of us, think about how do Black people learn to love Black people. And that's important. And we got to think about that culturally, and we've got to think about that spiritually. What can we do here in Philadelphia to, and I've been here now 26 years, so I got my Philly card. And, you know, but what can we do that we can culturally agree on? And what can we do to make room for us spiritually? I don't think we're ever going to be at the place where we can have the old days of people talk about the guy named Sam Evans and the family and that table. And there have been attempts to make that happen again. And maybe gone are those days. Maybe gone are the days where you have a Hardy Williams and a Wilson Good and George Burrell, and that little group then represents the political masses. We're probably moving farther from a talented 10th to a committed quorum, and begin to respect each other. You know, I'm a church dude. I'm not a politician. I'm a pastor of a church, and I'm not going to try to cross over and be anything other than a pastor, but respect that the church has a role. And those who want to run for office, I'm going to respect them. And those that are Muslim, I'm going to respect Masjidullah, because Germantown isn't going to get any better unless Masjidullah does its thing and Enon does its thing. And I got in trouble for calling that section of the city Germantown. But we got to all start, stop biting each other, and everybody do you. I'm a pastor. I'm going to do me. The imams are going to do them. The politicians are going to do them. And then if we all clean up our section, then we meet as a committed quorum, we might get some stuff done. And in this moment where city council has a majority Black, all of us need to remind them they're there for such a time as this. And if they don't deliver, we've lived with a white city council before.
Yeah.
I think to get back to where we are, the amount of love and affection that I have for Alyn Waller is profound. And I know the love that he has for me. And so it's trust. Like, we move together on stuff. If he needs to represent my viewpoint on something, he kind of knows where I'm going to be. And if he offers that, people are going to listen to that. The same thing for me. If I have a sense of where he's going to be, because we trust each other, right? And I think so often in our community, we have viewed the rewards of success as so small that we think we've got to corner the market. And so we choose sometimes to have a whole grape rather than a half a watermelon.
Yeah.
Because we're small-minded and myopic. But if you love each other and you remember that God loves you, he will always create more than enough for us, and for us to keep the door open to invite somebody else in. And that's just the miracle of his love. It multiplies itself. And when you can connect with other people like that, you know, it really becomes this beautiful relationship.
I think that's beautiful. The abundance mentality versus the scarcity. And as we get ready to wrap up, I want to just ask you to tie it back to COVID-19. Has this pandemic taught us anything? And will it move Black folk forward in a positive way? I want both of your thoughts on this. Will it move us forward in a positive way?
It absolutely will. I am ultimately, because of the Lord Jesus Christ, I am an optimist. And I believe that things like this come only to make you strong. We're going to get through it. We're going to be better. The best is yet to come. God is going to reveal God's self in this. A new group of leaders is going to rise up. Families are going to be stronger. We're going to expose holes in all of us that need to be addressed. We're going to have a new agenda. It's going to get better. It may get worse before it gets better, but it is going to get better. If I don't believe that, then I shouldn't do what I do. So I do. I think it is going to be better. We're going to learn. And this time next year, I believe we will be able to look back on this, lament, because that's part of our religious experience. We will lament those that died that did not have to. Those of us who work with grieving people, our churches should not just get back in and start jumping, shouting, and praising. One of the services, when we all get back together, we should lament the thousands of people who died because we did not have leadership that acted quickly enough. But after we do that, we will praise God for what we have experienced, and we will build from this, because my granddaughter is going to have a better world than I have. And that's going to happen.
Yes. Yeah. And, but, you know, Reverend Mitchell, I mean, we clearly self-determination was a big lesson.
It's a huge thing. I am, as Alyn is, I am hopeful. I am less optimistic, but I'm very hopeful. I know that God will get tremendous amounts of glory out of this period. I think we will see a throwing off of some of the materialism that has shackled us in America, where we will be able to redirect some of our investment in ourselves, in our community, in righteous works. When you look at the number of Blacks who have died in our community, they are overwhelmingly and disproportionately living in nursing homes, where we are still content to throw off generations very, very quickly. And I think we've got to revisit the idea of building even nursing homes and demanding justice in the nursing home system that really has not occupied enough of our imagination. And I think we've got to speak to that. I am hopeful. I am optimistic. I also do believe that my religious experience, my faith informs me that this is also a time, though, when God separates the sheep from the goats. And I think that's the challenging part. And I pray for God's mercy in a lot of that and for his grace, because I think as we separate the sheep from the goats, we could see a lot of stuff coming out of this that we don't really fully understand.
Yeah.
I think white men have got to stop treating wearing a mask like an SEC football game. This is not a competition for you to show how strong and vibrant you are. It is the people perish for lack of knowledge.
Yeah. And we see the changes happening. We're going to be coming into what I call the new world, the new normal, a post-COVID-19 world. And it's up to us to create what that's going to be. And I just want to say I'm grateful for both of you sharing your wisdom and your intellect tonight for this conversation. Real Talk with Cherri is about elevating the conversation within our community, talking about real issues. And thank you for lending your voices here tonight. And I want each of you to take a moment and just say, because we always end with gratitude, and I want each of you to take a moment and just say a couple of things that you are grateful for briefly as we wrap up. And whoever wants to go first can do that. Yeah.
I'll let my elder go first.
I am grateful. I'm grateful for this season that I've had to spend at home with my wife, with family. I'm grateful for a chance to re-center. I'm grateful for the Untitled Tabernacle Church and for the ability to respond in creative ways to both worship and witness. And I'm grateful for the new relationships that are coming out as a result of the koinonia fellowship that happens when you do work. I think Marshall was right. We share family, we're cousins, but we've spent more time working on COVID-19 than we've spent since we've been pastoring in this city. So I'm grateful for the new relationships that are popping up and opportunities to serve.
Wonderful.
I'm grateful for Salem. I'm grateful for its ability to unfetter me and allow me to use some of my creative juices outside of the pulpit. I think that takes a matured church that shows an appreciation for a pastor, because they allow me to be my weird, quirky self, and that allows me to be me. I'm grateful for the relationships that have been smaller before but are growing more and more voluminous. I'm grateful for people who have not joined our church, who don't belong to our church, and I don't know whether or not they're Christians or people of faith, but who have come by the church, have encouraged us, have dropped off masks, literally thousands of masks that we've given to other people. And I think if we can help to open the door for people to come to Christ that way, right, we will truly be the church that Christ would have us to be. And I'm also grateful to see the enormous and prodigious intellect and professional ability of people like Alyn Stanford and those Black doctors, who at a time when we are seeing Black misery have shined a light of Black possibility on the entire world.
Definitely. Black excellence to the realist. And I will put the link here for all of you who want to donate. I know I've personally donated, and I think that it is time for us to start putting our money behind causes we believe in. We heard this discussion today, and I'm grateful for Reverend Dr. Alyn Waller. I'm grateful for Reverend Marshall Mitchell for being here on Real Talk with Cherri. And I'm grateful for all of you who tuned in tonight. Please tag a friend and share this video. We really appreciate your commentary. And I want to say thank you, gentlemen. As I wrap up, I want to just let you guys know that the next episode of Real Talk with Cherri will stream live here Monday at 8 p.m. Real Talk airs Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. We will have all sorts of leaders and elevated conversations that are relevant to our time. And so I hope that you will tune in next time, that you will share this video. It streams live here on Facebook as well as on YouTube. And just let people know it is time for us to build a new world. We can do more than just survive. We can thrive, and it's up to us. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to my two guests for this evening. I'm going to wrap this up. And everyone have a wonderful night. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a conversation. How about that? And show some love, right?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Have a good night.
See you.